many ways to capture the value of a company create. These methods are referred to commonly as a monetization or revenue models. These terms are much too limiting. Implicit in the idea of monetization is that it is separate features of a product that can be added or removed at will. In reality, capturing value is an in, intrinsic part of the product. Hypothesis often changes to the way a company capture value can be far-reaching consequences for the rest of the business, product, and marketing strategy. Engine of growth pivot. As we'll see in chapter 10, there are three primary engines of growth: the power startup, the viral, the sticky, and the paid growth model. In this type of pivot, a company changes its growth strategy to seek faster or more profitable growth. Commonly, but not always, the engine of growth also require a change in the way value is captured. Channel pivot. In traditional sales terminology, the mechanism by which a company delivers its products to customer is called the sales channel or distribution channel. For example, consumer packaged goods are sold in a grocery store, cars are sold in dealership, and much enterprise software is sold with extensive customization by consulting and professional services firm. Often the requirement of the channel determine the price, features, and competitive landscape of a product. A channel pivot is the recognition that the same basic solution could be delivered through a different channel with greater effectiveness. Whenever a company abandons a previously complex sales process to sales direct to its end user, a channel pivot is in progress. It is precisely because of its destructive effect on sales channel that the internet has had such a disruptive influence in industries that previously required complex sales and distribution channels, such as newspaper, magazines, and book publishing. Technology pivot. Occasionally, a company discover a way to achieve the same solution by using a completely different technology. Technology pivots are much more common in established businesses. In other words, they are sustaining innovation and incremental improvement designed to appeal to and retain an existing customer base. Established companies excel at this kind of pivot because so much is not changing. The customer segment is the same, the customer problem is the same, the value capture model is the same, the channel partners are the same. The only question is whether the new technology can provide superior price or performance compared with the existing technology. A pivot is a strategic hypothesis. Although the pivot identified above will be familiar to students of business strategy, the ability to pivot is no substitute for sound strategic thinking. The problem with providing famous examples of pivot is that most people are familiar only with the successful and strategies of famous companies. Most readers knows that Southwest or Walmart is an example of a low-cost disruption in their markets, that Microsoft an example of a platform monopoly, and that Starbucks has leveraged a powerful premium brand that is generally less well known, are the pivots that were required to discover those strategies. Companies have a strong incentive to align their PR stories around the heroic founder and make it seem that their success was the inevitable result of a good idea. Thus, although startup often pivot into a strategy that seems similar to that of a successful companies, it is important not to put too much stock in these analogies. It's extremely difficult to know if the analogy has been drawn properly, have we copied the essential features or just superficial ones. Well, what work in that industry work in yours? Well, what has worked in the past work today? A pivot is better understood as a new strategic hypothesis That will require a new minimum viable product to test. Pivots are a permanent fact of life for any growing business. Even after a company achieves initial success, it must continue to pivot. Those familiar with the technology lifecycle ideas of theorists such as Geoffrey Maury knows certain latter stage pivots by the name he has given them: the chasm, the tornado, the bowling alley. Readers of the disruptive innovation literature spearheaded by Howard Clanton Christensen will be familiar with established companies that fail to pivot when they should. The critical skill for manager today is to match those theories to their present situation so that they apply the right advice at the right time. Modern managers cannot have escaped the deluge of recent books calling on them to adapt, change, reinvent, or upend their existing business. Many of the work in this category are long on exhor, ex, exhortation and short on specifics. A pivot is not just an exhortation to change. Remember, it is a special kind of a structure change designed to test a new fundamental hypothesis about the product, business model, and engine of growth. It is the heart of the lean startup method. It is what makes the company that follow lean startup resilient in the face of mistake. If we take a wrong turn, we have the tool we need to realize it and agility to find another path. In part 2, we have looked at the startup ideas from its initial leap of faith, tested it with a minimum viable product, used innovation, accounting, actionable metrics to evaluate the result, and made the decision to pivot or preserve. I have treated these subjects in great detail to prepare for what comes next on the page. These processes may seem clinical, slow, and simple. In the real world, something different is needed. We have learned to steer when moving slowly. Now we must learn to race. Laying a solid foundation is only the first step towards our real destination: acceleration. Part 3: Accelerate. Start your engine. Most of the decision startup phase are not clear cut. How often should you release a product? Is there a reason to release weekly rather than daily or quarterly or annually? Product releases incur overhead, and so from an efficiency point of view, releasing often leaves less time to devote to building the product. However, waiting too long to release can lead to the ultimate waste, making something that nobody wants. How much time and energy should companies invest in infrastructure and planning early on in anticipation of success? Spend too much and you waste precious time that could have been spent learning. Spend too little and you may fail to take advantage of early success and cede market leadership to a fast follower. What should employees spend their days doing? How do we hold people accountable for learning at an organizational level? Traditional department create incentive structure that keep people focused on excellence in their specialties: marketing, sales, product development. But what if the company being interests are served by cross-functional collaboration? A startup needs organizational structure that combat the extreme uncertainty that is a startup chief enemy. The lean manufacturing movement faced similar questions on the factory floor. Their answers are relevant for a startup as well, with some modification. The critical first question for any lean transformation is: which activities create value and which are a form of waste. Once you understand this distinction, you can begin using lean technique to drive out waste and increase the efficiency of the value creating activities. For these techniques to be used in a startup, they must be adapted to the unique circumstance of entrepreneurship. Recall from chapter 3 that value in a startup is not the creation of stuff, but rather validated learning about how to build a sustainable business. What product do customers really want? How will our business grow? Who is our customer? Which customer should we listen to and which should we ignore? These are the questions that need answering as quickly as possible to maximize a startup chance of success. That is what creates value for a startup. In part 3, we will develop techniques that allow lean startup to grow without sacrificing the speed and agility that are the lifeblood of every startup. Contrary to common belief, liturgy and bureaucracy are not the inevitable fate of company as they achieve maturity. I believe that with the proper foundation, lean startup can grow to become lean enterprises that maintain their agility, learning orientation, and culture of innovation even as they scale. In chapter 9, we will see how lean startup take advantage of the counterintuitive power of small batches, just as lean manufacturing has pursued as just-in-time approach to build product, reducing the need for in-process inventory. Lean startup practice just-in-time scalability, conducting product experiment without making massive upfront investment in planning and design. Chapter 10 will explore the metrics startups should use to understand their growth as they add new customer and discover new markets. Sustainable growth follows one of the three engines of growth: paid, viral, or sticky. By identifying which engine of growth a startup is using, it can then direct energy where it will be most effective in growing the business. Each engine require a focus on unique metrics to evaluate the success of new product and prioritize new experiment when used with the innovation accounting method described in part 2. These metrics allow startup to figure out when their growth is at risk of running out and pivot accordingly. Chapter 11 shows how to build an adaptive organization by investing in the right amount of process to keep teams nimble as they grow. We will see how techniques from the toolkit of lean manufacturing, such as the five whys, help startup teams grow without being bureaucratic or dysfunctional. We also will see how lean discipline set the stage for a startup to transition into an established company driven by operational excellence. In chapter 12, we'll come full circle as startups grow into established companies. They face the same pressure that make it necessary for today enterprise to find new ways to invest in disruptive innovation. In fact, we'll see that an advantage of a successful startup rapid growth is that the company can keep its entrepreneurial DNA even its matures. Today's companies must learn to master a management portfolio of sustainable and disruptive innovation. It is an obsolete view that sees a startup as going through discrete phase that leave earlier kind of work, such as innovation behind. Rather, modern companies must excel at doing multiple kinds of work in parallel. To do so, we'll explore techniques for incubating innovation teams within the context of an established company. I have included an epilogue called Waste Not, in which I consider some of the broader implication of the success of the lean startup movement, place it in historical context, including cautionary lessons from past movement, and make suggestions for its future direction. Number 9, batch. In the book Lean Thinking, In the book Lean Thinking, James Womack and Daniel Johns recount a story of starting newsletters into envelopes with the assistance of one of the author, two young children. Every envelope had to be address stamp filled with a letter and sealed. The daughters, aged 6 and 9, knew how they should go about completing the project. Daddy, first you should fold all the newsletter, then you should attach the seal, then you should put on the stamp. Their father wanted to do it the counterintuitive ways. Complete each envelope one at a time. They, like most of us, through that was backward, explaining to him that wouldn't be efficient. He and his daughter each took half the envelopes and compete to see who would finish first. The father won the race, and not just because he is an adult. It happened because the one envelope at a time approach is a faster way of getting the job done, even though it seems inefficient. This has been confirmed in many studies, including one that was recorded on video. The one envelope at a time approach is called single piece flow. In lean manufacturing, it works because of the surprising power of small batch. When we do work that proceed in stages, the batch size refers to how much work move from one stage to the next at a time. For example, if we were stuffing 100 envelopes, the intuitive ways to do it, folding 100 letters at a time, would have a batch size of 100. Single piece flow is so named because it has a batch size of 1. Why does stuffing one envelope at a time get the job done faster, even though it seems like it would be slower? Because our intuition doesn't take into account the extra time required to sort, stack, and move around the large piles of half complete envelopes. When it's done the other way, it seems more efficient to repeat the same tasks over and over, in part because we expect that we will get better at this simple task the more we do it. Unfortunately, in process oriented work like this, individual performance is not nearly as important as the overall performance of the system. Even if the amount of time that each process took was exactly the same batch production approach will still would be superior for even more counterintuitive reason. For example, imagine that the letters didn't fit in the envelopes within the large batch approach. We wouldn't find that out until nearly the end. With the small batches, we know almost immediately what if the envelopes are defective and won't seal. In the large batch approach, we have to unstuff all the envelopes, get new ones, and restuff them. In the small batch approach, we find this out immediately and have no rework required. All these issues are visible in a process as simple as stuffing envelopes, but they are of real and much greater consequences in the work of every company, large or small. The small batch approach produce a finished product every few seconds, where the large batch approach must deliver all the product at once. At the end, imagine what this might look like if the time horizon was hours, days, or weeks. What if it turns out the customer have decided they don't want the product? Which process would allow a company to find this out sooner? Lean manufacturers discovered the benefit of a small batches decades ago. In the post World War II economy, Japanese car makers such as Toyota could not compete with huge American factories that use the latest mass production technique. Following the intuitively efficient way of building mass production factories build car by using ever larger batch size, they would spend huge amount of money buying machines that could produce car parts by the tens, hundreds, or thousands. By keeping those machines running at peak speed, they could drive down the unit cost of each part and produce cars that were incredibly inexpensive so long as they were completely uniform. The Japanese car market was far too small for companies such as Toyota to employ those economies of scale. Thus, Japanese companies face intense pressure from mass production. Also, in the war ravaged Japanese economic capital was not available for massive investment in large machines. It was against this backdrop that innovators such as Tichi Ono, Shigeru Shingo, and others found a way to succeed by using a small batch instead of buying large specialized machines that could produce thousands of parts at a time. Toyota used a smaller general purpose machine that could produce a wide variety of parts in small batches. This required figuring out ways to reconfigure each machine rapidly to make the right part at the right time. By focusing on this change over time, Toyota was able to produce entire automobile by using small batches throughout the process. This rapid changes changing a machine was no easy feat, as in any lean transformation existing systems and tools often needs to be reinvented to support working in smaller batches. Shigeru Shingo created the concept of SMED, single minute exchange of die. In order to enable a smaller batch size of work in early Toyota factories, he was so relentless in rethinking the way machines were operated that he was able to reduce changeover time that previously took hours to less than 10 minutes. He did this not by asking workers to work faster, but by reimagining and restruct, restructuring the work that needed to be done. Every investment in better tools and process had a corresponding benefits in terms of shrinking the batch size of work. Because of its smaller batch size, Toyota was able to produce a much greater diversity of products. It was no longer necessary that each product be exactly the same to gain the economics of scale that powered mass production. Thus, Toyota could serve its smaller, more fragmented market and still compete with the mass producer. Over time, that capability allowed Toyota to move successfully into larger and larger market until it became the world's largest automaker in 2008. The biggest advantage of working in small batches is that quality problems can be identified much sooner. This is the origin of Toyota famous add-on code, which allow any worker to ask for help as soon as they notice any problem, such as a defect in a physical part, stopping the entire production line if it cannot be corrected immediately. This is another very counterintuitive practice, and assembly line work best when it is functioning smoothly. Rolling car after car off the end of the line, the add-on card can interrupt this careful flow as the line is halted repeatedly. However, the benefit of finding and fixing problem faster overweighs this cause. This process of continuously driving out a defect has been a win-win for Toyota and its customer. It is the root cause of Toyota historic high quality rating and low cost. Small batches and entrepreneurship. When I teach entrepreneurs this matter, I often begin with stories about manufacturing. Before long, I can see the questioning look: what does this have to do with my startup? The theory that is the foundation of Toyota success can be used to dramatically improve the speed at which a startup finds validated learning. Twitter discovered that the small batches made their factories more efficient. In contrast, in the lean startup, the goal is not to produce more stuff efficiently, it is to, as quickly as possible, learn how to build a sustainable business. Think back to the example of envelope stuffing. What if it turns out that the customer doesn't want the product we are building? Also, this is a never good news for an entrepreneur. Finding out sooner is much better than finding out later. Working in small batches ensures that a startup can minimize the expenditure of time, money, and effort that ultimately turns out to have been wasted. Small batches at IMBU. At IMBU, we apply these lessons from manufacturing to the way we work. Normally, new versions of product like ours are released to customer on a monthly, quarterly, or yearly cycle. Take a look at your cell phone. Odds are it is not the very first version of its kind. Even innovative companies such as Apple produce a new version of their flagship phones about once a year. Bundle up in the product release are dozens of new features. At the release of iPhone 4, Apple boosted more than 1,500 changes. Ironically, many high-tech products are manufactured in advanced facilities that follow the latest in lean thinking, including small batches and single-piece flow. However, the process that is used to design the product is stuck in the era of mass production. Think of all changes that are made to a product such as the iPhone. All 1500 of them are released to customer in one giant batch. Behind the scenes in the development and the design of the product itself, large batches are still the rule. The work that goes into the development of a new product proceed on a virtual assembly line. Product manager figure out what features are likely to please customer. Product designer then figure out how those features should look and feel. These designs are passed to engineering, which builds something new or modify an existing product, and once this is done, hands it off to somebody responsible for verifying that the new product worked the way the product manager and designer intended. For a product such as the iPhone, these internal handoff may happen on a monthly or quarterly basis. Think back one more time to the envelope stuffing exercise. What is the most efficient way to do this work? At IMBU, we attempt to design, develop, and ship our new feature one at a time, taking advantage of the power of small batches. Here what it looked like. Instead of working in separate department, engineers and designer would work together side by side on one feature at a time. Whenever the feature was ready to be tested with customer, they immediately would release a new version of the product which would go live on our website for a relatively small number of people. The team would be able to immediately to assess the impact of their work, evaluate its effect on customers, and decide what to do next. For tiny changes, the whole process might be repeated several times per day. In fact, in the aggregate, IMBUs make about 50 changes to its product on average every single day. Just as with the Toyota production system, the key to being able to operate this quickly is to check for defects immediately, thus preventing bigger problems later. For example, we had an extensive set of automated tasks that assured that after every change our product still work as designed. Let's say an engineer accidentally remove an important feature such as the checkout button on one of our e-commerce pages. Without this button, customer no longer could buy anything from IMVUs. It's as if our business instantly become a hobby. Analo- Analogously to the Toyota add-on code, IMVUs use an elaborate set of defense mechanism that prevented engineers from accidentally breaking something important. We call this our product immune system because those automatically protections went beyond checking that the product behave as expected. We also continuously monitor the health of our business itself so that mistakes were found and removed automatically. Going back to our business to hobby example of the missing checkout button, let's make the problem a little more interesting. Imagine that instead of removing the button altogether, engineers make a mistake and change the button color so that it is now white on a white background. From the point of view of automatic functionality tests, the button is still there and everything is working normally. From the customer point of view, the button is gone and so nobody can buy anything. This class of problem is hard to detect solely with automation, but is still catastrophic from a business point of view. At IMVUs, our immune system is programmed to detect these business consequences and automatically invoke our equivalent of the add-on card. When our immune system detect a problem, a number of things happen immediately. Number one, the defective change is removed immediately and automatically. Number two, everyone on the relevant team is notified of the problem. Number three, the team is blocked from introducing any further changes, preventing the problem from being compounded by future mistake. Number four, until the root cause of the problem is found and fixed. This root cause analysis is discussed in greater detail in chapter 11. At IMVUs, we call this continuous deployment, and even in the fast moving world of software development, it is still considered controversial as the lean startup movement has gained traction. It has come to be embraced by more and more startups, even those that operate mission critical application. Among the most cutting edge example is Wellfront, whose pivot was described in chapter 8. The company practices true continuous deployment, including more than a dozen releases to customer every day in an SEC regulated environment. Continuous deployment beyond software. When I tell this story to people who work in a slower moving industry, they think I am describing something futuristic, but increasingly more and more industries are seeing their design process accelerated by the same underlying forces that make this kind of rapid iteration possible in the future industry. There are three ways in which this is happening. Number one, hardware becoming software. Think about what has happened in consumer electronics. The latest phones and tablets computers are little more than a screen connected to internet. Almost all of their value is determined by their software. Even old school products such as automobiles are seeing ever larger part of their value being generated by the software they carry inside, which controls everything from the entertainment system to tuning the engine to controlling the brakes. What can be built out of software can be modified much faster than a physical or mechanical devices can. Number two, fast production changes because of the success of the lean manufacturing movement. Many assembly lines are set up to allow each new product that comes off the line to be customized completely without sacrificing quality or cost effectiveness. Historically, this has been used to offer the customer many choices of product, but in the future, this capability will allow the designer of product to get much faster feedback about new versions When the design changes, there is no excessive inventory of the old version of slow things down, since machines are designed for rapid changeover. As soon as the new design is ready, new versions can be produced quickly.